Hi everyone. So now we're going to review adding a new client to the system. So as you know, we've already discussed how to log into the system as well as the different options available on our homepage dashboard. So the first thing I want to do before I search for my client is I realize that, okay, my client is not in this housing locator program. So right when they're coming to me, I want to make sure I click on Enter Data As. And then, as discussed in the previous video, we want to make sure that we click the plus next to the program we're looking for. In this case, it's Rhode Island Family Shelter, the emergency shelter. So we click on the plus next to it, and now we are officially entering data as Rhode Island Family Shelter. And you could see that by scrolling over it. Remember, this does not change, but you are entering data as. Now, backdate we would use if we were creating a client for a day in the past, but for now we are going to pretend as if this client is just showing up today for the first time. So we click on Client Point, which is on the left-hand side, to search for a client. The first thing you want to do is remember that when you're searching for a client, you don't want to just search for their name and fill all of this in. You want to try their name and their social first before creating a new client with the system. The reason for this is because it is important to make sure that in case your client provided a different provider a different name or spelling of the name, or even a different social security number, or maybe they didn't know their social security number, you want to search by their name and then their social before filling this in and creating anybody into the system. So for the first thing, if our client was named George Smith, I would click search. And now I see there's already different results that show up on the bottom. So when I search for a client, the results come to the end of the screen. There's already a George Smith in the system, but we realize that the system gives us names that sound like or that are spelt similar to the person that we're searching for. So because there's a George Smith in the system, we know it's not Grace or Greg. We want to make sure, okay, it looks like George Smith's already in the system. However, if I'm checking with the date of birth or social security number of my client, I want to make sure that this is actually the client I'm looking for. In this case, we're going to say that this is not George Smith. He does not have a middle initial, and this is not his social or date of birth. So now we're going to hit clear, and what we want to do is search by his social security number or whatever you have. If you don't have a social security number, then you want to do the best you can by matching date of birth and stuff like that. So we're going to pretend as if we do have George's social security number, and we're going to click search. And no one showed up under the social. So now I feel comfortable enough, because I've searched by his name, to fill in the rest of this information. His name, if he had a middle initial or middle name, you want to put that here. Suffix, this would be like junior, senior, etc. Name data quality. Now, most of the time we want full name reported. If they only want to give us their first initial and last name, that's okay. We do want to try to get their full name. However, full name reported is usually what we select here. An alias means a different name that the client goes by. George does not have an alias, so we would leave that blank. Social security number, we do have the entire social security number. If George only gave us partial of the social security number, say he only knew the last 4 digits, we would leave this blank and then put the numbers that we do know for his social security number at the end. And then for social security number data quality, we would put approximate or partial social security number reported. We do want to work on getting the social security number. If the client refuses completely to give you the social security number, you could clear out every number and put client refused. However, it is going to impact your data quality, so you do want to try to get his social security number. The social security number is going to be a bit different now because not a real client, and so I didn't actually have his social. But if George Smith did give me a social, I would type it in here again, click in full social security number reported, because we do have his full social, and then it asks, is this client a U.S. military veteran? Yes, no, or client refused. Try to avoid client doesn't know or not collected. Try to figure out with the client if they are a veteran. And we're going to say George is not a veteran. And we're going to click search. And now again, it's going to show us some things that sound like it or people that it could be him, but we see here this is not any of the clients that already exist in the system. Okay, and then we click Add New Client with this information. A pop-up box says you are about to add a new client to the system, and you want to make sure you look through all the possible matches before continuing, which are the ones on the bottom. You can move this around, double check, triple check, do whatever you can to make sure you're not creating a duplicate in the system, and then click OK. Okay, and then this box pops up. It's called Backdate Mode. So again, it's set to the current system date, which is the date and time that I'm creating this video, or the date and time that you're logged into the system. If George Smith was backdated when I created him, so if he had entered my project yesterday and I needed to create him into the system for yesterday, I would put yesterday's date here. However, that's not the case, so I'm going to leave this backdate mode as it is and just click Use Current System Date, or I can click on this X to close this box. Okay, the last part of just creating the client in the system is making sure the client record and demographics are completely filled out. So we see client record. This is everything that pulled forward from the stuff we just entered in the previous screen. So it's all complete. I just want to double check it. And if it looks good, I click Save. Now for demographics, I click on the pencil next to the left of client demographics. And I want to put in George's date of birth. And George's date of birth is 02/05/1976. And the date of birth type, since we have the full date of birth, we would put full date of birth reported. However, say George Smith only told you it was some date in February 1976, didn't remember, or if he said January 1976 and didn't remember the day, it is okay to estimate the birthday. So if he said someday in February, it's okay for me to just put the 1st. If he said someday in January, it's okay for me to put the 1st. You want to try to get the client's ID so you can verify the date of birth, but anything you have here is important. If I did only get an approximate date of birth, I want to make sure I select that. And the same thing with the social. If I'm missing digits, you want to make sure that you don't select full date of birth reported. We do have the full date of birth, which is why we selected full date of birth reported. And now the gender. So you never want to assume a client's gender. It's very important that you double check this with the client as to the gender they identify as. So you'll see there's different options here. There's female, male, trans female, which is male to female, trans male, which is female to male, gender non-conforming, which means they don't identify exclusively as male or female. So although this may feel awkward to ask, it's very important to ask because we do not want anything in the system that the client does not consent to. So although a person, George Smith, may maybe look like a male, maybe he identifies as a female or a trans female, or maybe he doesn't identify as any gender. For now, we are going to put male. If George Smith refused to give us his gender, we would put client refused. However, it will affect data quality, so try to have an open and honest conversation with George to figure out what gender he does identify as. So for now, George did tell me that he is a male. Primary race. So you'll see there's some races listed here. There's American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, Black or African American, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, and white. Then there's also client refused or client doesn't know. Data not collected, so if you didn't collect the data, all 3 of these answers will affect negatively on your data quality. So you want to try to see what race your client identifies as. So if George Smith told me that he identified as white, I would ask if he has a secondary race he identifies as. Most of the time, you may get an answer like, no, I'm just white, or if it was Black or Asian, maybe no, they're Asian or they're just Black, and that's okay. But if they don't provide a secondary race, we want to make sure that the primary race and secondary race are the same. So if George said, I'm only white, then we would put white, white. However, in this instance, George told us that he's Native Hawaiian, and so I would put white and Native Hawaiian. And then ethnicity. So this just wants to know, does the client identify as being Hispanic, Latino, or non-Hispanic, non-Latino? A lot of times you may get a client refusing to answer or they don't know how to answer it. but we want to make sure we try to get an answer for this question. And so we're going to say George said non-Hispanic Latino. And then we click Save. And now we see all of this information that was collected when we created the client's profile is now in the system as of the date the client was created. So when I click on Summary page, George was added to the system today, which is the date I'm creating this profile, or I did create the profile. And all of this information in client demographics has a history bar next to it, so you can see when that data was collected. So you just click on the bar, and I see, okay, on 2/7/19, all of this information was collected as of date of creation. We must remember that all of this information is going to be pulled forward into the client's entry exit. So the first thing you want to do when you create a client or are assigned a new client is double check this information.